It's the West Tigers podcast, episode number 87. Eddie Otto, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Joel. Never dull in Tiger Town, is it?
No, well, I remember sort of our parting words last week that it was the feeling that the bomb was about to drop, and it certainly did drop. It's been quite an interesting week in Tiger territory. Obviously, Benji is the main talking point, but I just want to go through a few things, if you don't mind, and something just to put things into perspective a little bit. So Benji debuted 17 years ago. Okay, so just to get your mind around how long his career has been. He was on a one-year deal, so he hasn't been on a multi-year contract since the end of 2016. If you remember, 2 years ago, it was August 2018, the West Tigers filmed that promotional video with Robbie Farah, where they were texting each other. It said, one more year. That's now 2 seasons ago, 2 full seasons ago. Another point is, surely when they watch the video together and he sees the defensive errors in his game, he must think to himself, yeah, that wasn't good. The Tigers are running 12th. We're not running 4th or 3rd. We're not setting the world on fire. The team is struggling. And the 2 wins that we've had in the last, I think it was the last 8 or 9 weeks, have been against the 2 teams that are coming last and second last. And then Benji, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to him, he seems to not realise and not understand where things are at. I mean, surely you would be thinking to yourself, there's a very good chance that this was going to be my last year. I mean, don't you take all those facts into consideration, especially the fact you've been on a one-year deal for the last 4 seasons? It means you're at the end. The whole thing, I've got to say, is a bit bizarre.
Yeah, I think you must have read some of the little things I've written down, Joel, because you just reeled off 4 or 5 of them. And this is a delicate one because this is, arguably the best player in the club's history. And I think by and large, him coming back to the club has been a success, Joel, because he has provided, which a lot of guys haven't over the last 3 years, he's provided really good value for money. He came back as, I think, a minimum wage first year. And like you said, his role was meant to be to back up Josh Reynolds. And he was more than happy to do that on minimum wage. I think the last 2 years he might have been upgraded, based on performance, because he did well that first year. I thought last year was probably, the back end was really good. But I remember him saying at the back end of after the season, he said, I went through and watched the tapes closely, all the games, and I thought I had 1 more year. And I honestly think, is he doing the same thing now? Is he going through and watching all the tapes that we've seen this year, Joel? And like you said, did he expect to get another season? Because I think there's been a big drop-off defensively in his game. And I think there's been times, this might sound a little bit harsh, I think times he's looked a little bit nonplussed out there. He hasn't looked as motivated as he was last year. So I was surprised sort of at the outcry in the media, although maybe we shouldn't be, given it's a Daily Telegraph. But like I said, surely I think 80-90% of the Tigers fans saw this sort of situation coming.
Yeah, but why didn't Benji? I mean, there's an incongruence there. As I say, when you've lived your life for the past 4 years, it's like being a casual worker. You haven't been a full-time worker somewhere, you've been a casual. And then, because when you're only signing 1-year deals, and you know that in 4 weeks' time, or maybe 2 months ago, he would have said to Madge, what are you thinking for next year? Or should I be starting to think about other plans? Should I be what do you think? Where do you think I'm at? The way that it's been handled by Benji is a little bit bizarre. Like, he seems to. I watched him on Fox Sports, and I've listened to his interviews, and it feels to me like someone who is at the top of his game has had all of a sudden, out of the blue, this strange decision. It's strange. I've got to say, it is weird.
I was surprised. I sort of thought this would definitely be his last year. And over the course of the last couple of years, Joel, there's been numerous times where he said, I wanted to retire a Tiger. I wanted to retire playing good football, and I wanted to retire a Tiger. And there's a good chance now he's going to be doing neither of that. I mean, he's entitled to make his own decision. He's been a great player, and if he managed to find a bit part role in a Melbourne or a Roosters or a Manly, he could probably look okay for another year, Joel. But is it really is it really worth it? I'm like you. I find it a little bit bizarre. I don't know whether it's sort of, it's almost like it's not half as bad as what happened last time in 2013 when he left, because I think he was full of entitlement then, Joel. He was the highest paid player in the club. He'd been the captain, and he had a bad attitude that last year. But I sort of think now he's maybe just a little bit delusional with that, because he's sort of, the entitlement's back a bit. All of a sudden he's been captain this year. He's been in the starting side mainly, but he has been dropped this year, and he's had some poor games. So, I even saw Robbie Farah, an article with Robbie Farah, and of all people, you'd think Robbie Farah would be telling him to play on, and reading between the lines there, Robbie Farah was basically telling him to retire. He was saying, I knew at the end of last year that I was running the risk of playing 1 year too long, and I'd hate to see Benji sort of ruin his legacy. I don't want to make it look like I'm just potting Benji Marshall. I'm just a bit, I just find it a little bit bizarre that he's had this sort of change of tack from why he wanted to come back and how he wanted to finish. And I don't think there's been anything untoward behind the scenes. I think it's just naturally, he's 36, his form's fluctuating. We're not in the finals, we're 12th. We're going to miss the finals for the third straight year. So I just find it, strange when he said one line. I mean, he was fairly dignified in that interview, and he said all the right things about, he didn't come out and bag Luke Brooks or bag the club, but he said, West Tigers, we always seem to find out these things through the media. And I thought, well, Joel, who is leaking these things to the media? Is it coming from, Benji Marshall's agent or someone? Because it's someone in there who seems to get the mail from these meetings. I just think surely he could have had that conversation with the coach 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
He wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be the normal thing to do? When you're on a 1 year deal, as I say, it's like being a casual employee. Sometimes you've worked for let's say you work in a warehouse as a casual. You're filling in for someone. It comes to Christmas time. You're going to go to the boss and say, you want me to come back in January? You want me to come back after Christmas? I mean, it's just obvious that that's where it is. But he just didn't seem to be able to. It was bizarre that it got to this point. And I've got to say, I'm disappointed in Benji. And I think West Tigers fans, a lot of West Tigers fans, are disappointed in Benji, because instead of sitting here, for the last 7 minutes talking about, wow, what a great career it's been, what an amazing player, what he's done for West Tigers, he just doesn't. He's sort of robbing us of the chance to, you talk about destroying his legacy, but also from the fans' perspective, it's frustrating that we're not going to be able to give him a send-off, the send-off that he deserves. Whereas if he'd done what Chris Lawrence had done, we'd be like, wow, Benji, thank you so much. It's been amazing. We're so glad we were able to give you that you came back, and we were able to get that closure, and you are the best player we've ever had, and you helped us win a premiership. We wouldn't have won that premiership without you. So I think the fans feel a bit cheated when he goes, well, maybe I'll get a contract somewhere else, and maybe I'll play against West Tigers next year when I pull on a blue and white jersey. Do you know what I mean? That's how I feel. I feel disappointed by the fact that we can't sort of do it together.
Tough one. I just feel a bit confused. I just feel like the language changed. For 2 years, he was really consistent about, I want to play good football. I want to earn my spot. I want to retire a Tiger. Yep. I don't want to play anywhere else. And then all of a sudden, he's probably playing the worst football he's played in 3 years. He's obviously 2 years older, and now he wants to play next year, and he doesn't care that he doesn't care that it's not the Tigers. He prefer it to be the Tigers, but obviously, I mean, he said it himself. He said squads are being reduced to 28 next year. In that squad of 28 at the moment, we have 5 halves, and we have 2 of them that are on $800,000 a year. So you can't logically, if you're Adam Hartigan or Michael Maguire, the only logical decision was to say, sorry, Benji, we'd love to get rid of Josh Reynolds and maybe Luke Brooks, but they are both contracted players. Other clubs don't want them. They're younger. You're off contract. You're 36. That's a tough conversation. And I think the club made the right call. And I hope, I thought he interviewed okay the other night. I just hope that it doesn't turn, sour over the last month or so, because it's been, really nice him coming back and playing some good football and giving fans a bit of, healing, both for the first time that he left and the state the club that was in when he came back. We just lost Tedesco, Moses, Woods, and the club was in free fall. And him and Robbie coming back was a good story, and it sort of unified the club a little bit. So, there's a lot on the line here. If he was to go and play for a St George or a Manly for 1 year, and I think he's still got a little bit of thinking to do, whether he really, really thinks he can do it at a high level. I think there's only 2 or 3 strong clubs that could probably make him look good for a full season next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is that West Tigers fans were burnt by the Auckland Blues situation, and we did forgive and forget. The fact that he played against us, he played his 250th game against the West Tigers when he was playing for the Dragons. I think we got past that, and it was great to get that closure. And he came back humble. I thought he was humble. I thought he changed. And nobody is bigger than the club. But in a way, I feel like he's thrown the club under the bus by saying, well, I read about it in the paper. Like, here's a perfect opportunity to manage yourself out professionally, to be the consummate professional, to go out with some dignity, do the right thing by the club. And he didn't do it. I'm really upset. As I say, as a fan, I feel like we've been sort of cheated of the opportunity to really send off someone who's done so much for the club in a better way.
Yeah, well, I can tell by your voice that you're a little bit angry about it, and it's an emotional subject for Tigers fans. That was the one comment that irked me. I'm going to say, Joel, that was the only comment that irked me, that he read about it in the paper, and I thought, really, like, who planted that? And he wants to play on next year, and you could have had those conversations all year and found out if you really wanted to. And I thought that was an unnecessary dig, because I think, like you said, what do you expect? We're running 12th, you're 36, you haven't been in great form, you've been dropped for a month. You can't just roll out the red carpet every year,
Yeah, I know. It's as I say, disappointing. I am disappointed. I am upset about it. I just think that he didn't put the club first, and I think in a way, as much as probably it's not the right thing to say, I think he kind of owed us one. We took him back. We allowed him to have what he wanted, which was the ability to come back to West Tigers and finish his career here. And then to do that, I think that just takes a lot of shine off Benji, unfortunately, which I think is a great pity. You mentioned the leak. David Nofaluma, if you watched that interview, which was really, really uncomfortable at times, and really uncomfortable. I felt really sorry for Nofaluma in that interview. He confirmed that it was a player. So there's a lot going on, I think, behind the scenes, Eddie, and it's a great shame, because you would have to think that this leak is a senior player, and it has that smell about it that we've been here before.
Yeah, and once the Telegraph get the scent, Joel, they don't let off us. You know what I mean? And it's sort of ironic. They sit there on those NRL 360 shows and they say, well, the players are running the show, and the Tigers are a club run by, they run roughshod over the club. But, I mean, those journalists are cultivating relationship with those players, trying to destroy the club in a way. So it creates a lack of trust, doesn't it? Because if you're in that dressing room and you're Michael Maguire, and you're having a heart-to-heart conversation on a Monday morning, and then the Monday afternoon it comes out in the paper, it's obviously a player that's leaking it. And you'd have to think it's a player that's either not wanted or on their way out. That would be the logical thing to think. You wouldn't think it'd be a young guy or a David Nofaluma who's playing hard every week. So it creates a lack of trust. I think we've been a pushover in the media for a long time, and they're hammering the nails in the coffin at the moment. And do we have the leadership, sort of, Joel, on and off the field to stand up to this? Because we've seen it happen before with Jason Taylor, and it got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that was very poorly handled, that era, as every West Tigers fan is aware. I think given the fact that the club obviously chooses who they're going to put up for the interviews. They know who it is. They would know for sure, or they'd have a very, very good idea. But the fact that Josh Aloiai, Alex Twal, and David Nofaluma were the 3 players put up to front the media, I say pretty categorically you could probably rule those 3 out, which starts to narrow it down. But again, let me put it, and it's the same with the Benji situation. Let me put this in perspective. The club has not played finals for coming up to a decade. We're currently 12th. And the two teams that we've beaten in the last 8 weeks are last and second last. Where do some of these guys get off? Like, especially, you say, you believe it's somebody who's probably going to be finishing up in 4 weeks. Well, let it go, for goodness sakes. You know, I don't think there's any player that, of those guys that are off contract or that look like they're moving on, that can really hold their head that high on their performance. You know, the whole thing is, as I say, it is bizarre. West Tigers at times can be such a bizarre beast.
I know what you're saying. I think we got to be a little bit careful. I read a lot of traffic at the moment on the forums and whatnot. That's what happens when you lose and fans are unhappy, and rightly so. It's been a very, very long drought, and this has been a mightily disappointing last 6 or 8 weeks. But I still think, you know, when they come out with the headlines saying that this is the players run the club and the West Tigers have a soft underbelly, I think it's a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of crap, because we've underperformed, we've been mediocre, but I still think it could be 2 or 3 players, or it could be 1 or 2 disgruntled players. I still think there's a lot of guys in there, and you know, we haven't mentioned the game against Penrith, Joel, but I thought it was 18-6 with 10 minutes to go in that game, and that included a sin bin for us, and Penrith, I think, had 15 more sets. So it wasn't necessarily a team that had given up on the coach. I don't think this is a squad that's completely at war with Michael Maguire, but you wouldn't know it because the papers are whipping it up at the moment, and they're whipping up this sort of divide. So I don't want to come out and say, look, all the players have got to grow up and train harder and stick it out, because I don't think it's that simple. I watched Josh Allaway and David Nofaluma and Alex Twal, and I think they're 3 players that are improving and could be leaders. I was really impressed with Josh Allaway, the way he came out, and he actually had a go at some of the journalists. He said, you know, you guys, you're trying to dig for these sort of answers, and sometimes it's just tough times. You're just losing, you're short of confidence. No doubt there's issues, but I don't think it's as toxic as all the players saying, Madge, we don't want to train hard, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that it's, in a way, a failing of the club? We spoke about this last week, to sort of set the agenda to control the media message a bit more, to put out more of their own spin. Like, the club just seems to go dead silent. There was all this going on. You would think that there's been some leaks to West Tigers friendly journalists, Sydney Morning Herald, etc. But I just wonder if we're not controlling the narrative enough in these times, and not selling the vision enough, and not reassuring the fans enough, because we've heard nothing from the club officially other than Benji won't be here next year.
I 100% agree. I think, you know, I don't know exactly who it comes down to, whether it's a media manager or whether it's the board or Justin Pascoe or whoever, but they should sort of see these situations coming. You know that, you know, someone like Benji, someone who attracts headline, if he's not going to be offered a deal, the papers are going to be all over it. And it just seems we get blindsided, and then we can't stop the tidal wave of negativity. And it's controllable by having a good relationship with maybe that paper and getting on the front foot and being aggressive. And, you know, maybe someone like Madge or Adam Hardigan or something coming out a month ago and saying, you know, these are some of the decisions we have to make with the future of the club at in the forefront of our mind. Because if you say nothing, you leave it open to any sort of, you know, James Hooper, he reckons he's the greatest West Tigers fan of all time, but he's been potting us non-stop for the last 2 weeks. And maybe someone could sit down and do an interview with him and say, James, this is how it's run. This is our vision for 2 years. This is why we want to get our squad. Obviously, you can't come out and say we don't want Josh Reynolds, we don't want Moses Mbai, because I'm sure they're thinking that deep down. But you're right. It just seems to be a lack of real fight in the club when we're up against it. Seems like we just sort of lay down and take it, and we're just this shambolic club, which I don't think we are, because I think there's been some good things happen the last couple of years in terms of fighting performances and off field. But we're brought back to this crap all the time, and we sort of don't stand up for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We're too reactive, not proactive enough, and we're not in there fighting and defending the brand enough. That's what people like the CEO should be doing. They should be defending the brand. And I know that Lee's done a couple of interviews and that type of thing, but that's not. Lee is considered to be, yes, he is the chairman of the club, but he's not in West Tigers colours. He's not there every day. He's an overseer of West Tigers. You want someone who's at the absolute front line of the club, like an Adam Hardigan or a Justin Pascoe or even a Madge, to be coming out swinging and to say, well, this is what we've got to do, and start calling it out a little bit more, being a bit more, just having a bit more confidence. It just seems to be it feels like a lack of confidence. It may not be. Maybe it's a lack of understanding or a lack of knowing that that's what fans want more of. But you're right. We just seem to steer into these storms and then just batten down the hatches and ride it out. And there's damage done along the way. You can't just batten down the hatches and wait for it to go away.
No. And I mean, we've been talking about these issues with the roster for sort of 12, 18 months. So, I mean, Tigers fans aren't silly. We sort of knew this was coming in a way. And your point is that, some of the top brass have got to know that if you lose 3 or 4 or 5 games in a row with this squad and some of these guys on this money at this stage of their career, you're going to get panned. So you want to get on the front foot and get ahead of it. And Justin, he's done some good things, but I think you said before, maybe he's not as vocal a CEO as could be, or maybe he doesn't have the clout in the game to control the narrative like some of the big clubs and Nick Politis and stuff do. But it seems to be we're sort of whipping boys when we're on this sort of negative downward spiral with performances.
Mm. The term "walking on eggshells," I thought that was a bizarre thing for a player to say, because I don't think that Madge has been irrational with his droppings. I think he's frustratingly stood by some players when you could see that they're out of form, that it wasn't coming together, that maybe they were playing out of position. I don't think he's been irrational. I don't think I think, if you look at some of the performances, all of us sitting there after the game would be like, you've got to drop him next week. He's, terrible game, but that player is still picked there again next week. He hasn't been irrational with the droppings. I don't understand that. We're scared of making a bad performance because you'll drop us. The whole thing, again, Eddie, it does my head in. I'm confused.
Well, I mean, if players all said that, you would be concerned. But I think it's exaggerated. I think 1 or 2 guys might have said that. There might be 1 or 2 guys who have been dropped a couple of times this year and are not happy. Not everyone in the squad's going to be happy in a squad of 30 when you're losing and there's changes all the time. But I still think that the Telegraph has run with this and created something out of not nothing, but it might have just been an honesty session where players are entitled to have their say. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think, like you said, if it gets to the point where they're complaining about being dropped, well, winning games of football would solve that. So,
yeah.
I mean, you get the thing here is we're probably going to be in for a rough, 12 or 18 months here, because it doesn't look like there's going to be a lot of guys being able to be moved on. So I heard the show before. I think what we've got to identify is the guys that are improving and that are, behind Madge. We've got to do our best to get behind them and keep them. And the guys that are not improving and don't want to be a part of it, what do you do, Joel? Do you tell them to turn up next year, or do you just pay them out and tell them to stay home? Because it's you could get toxic next year if you have 6 or 7 of these guys that don't want to be here, that you can't get rid of, that are still there, and those attitudes can filter down the list, can't they?
Yeah, they really can. Everybody's worked in those work environments where it takes a couple of bad apples and it makes the whole bunch smell. I would be behind the club getting rid of anybody who isn't on board. You can't use the term "on the bus," but Ivan did use it. Get on the bus or go away. It is time to. The club is obviously backing Michael Maguire, and this is another point. Why isn't the club coming out and saying, "Michael Maguire, we're backing you. We're giving you another 12 months." Just come out and do that. If Michael Maguire is the coach that everybody seems to be at the club, Lee and everybody else seems to be saying he's our long-term coach, give him another 12 months. That'll do that. It's a power play. It shows who's running the place. This is what I'm talking about.
Well, you assume Michael Maguire wants to stay beyond next year, John.
Yeah, well, I would. Well, I'm presuming, but well, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's waiting to see how he's backed by the board. I mean, we don't know. But you would think that if Madge is the man for the job, give him another 12 months.
Oh yeah, I mean we've gone over this before. We've got to see this through. Like this is the guy we brought in as a premiership winning coach, and yes, he might have a style of coaching that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but he has got results. He has a formula that's won premierships in England. It's won a premiership with South here. He currently doesn't have the roster to do it at the West Tigers, which is a problem because I think his style of coach, I don't know if it's sustainable for 10 years if you're not winning, if you know what I mean. I don't think he's the ideal coach for a long-term rebuild, but we've started this and we've got to go through with it because you've got to give the coach an opportunity to get in the squad he wants because he hasn't had that opportunity. He's been desperately hamstrung by what were a lot of panic buys. Everyone knows who they were. And we've tried. I think they've tried desperately to formulate ways to create space and move players on. But it's difficult at the moment. And it's probably going to be difficult for another 12 months.
I wonder, as an outsider of a football club, and this is probably a little bit from left field, Eddie, but I wonder if and the bubble is the word that has been used, a lot this year. It's obviously a really unusual year. But I wonder if the club is at times guilty of blowing the wind up the skirts of players too much and maybe like we go back to last week and we were talking about the story that was about the West Tigers being stuck with 5 duds, and Chris the Queen posted on social media and Josh Reynolds. But if I'm in a team that's struggling and I can't even get into that struggling team, then the reality of the situation is that I'm being introspective. I'm looking at myself and my own performance and how I'm training and all of that. But it appears like there's this disconnect with reality with some of these guys at West Tigers, because we didn't finish in the top 4 last year. It's not like we're coming off some amazing couple of years of runs and this was just a bad year. The club has struggled on the field. Well, as we're saying, hasn't made the finals in nearly 10 years. This squad, the majority of this squad that we've got hasn't performed to a high, consistently high level. Where's the ego coming from? I don't see an ego because you're not winning, guys.
I think it's I don't think that's just West Tigers, Joel. I think that's life in 2020, and that's kids in 2020. I don't want to say that's everyone, but Joel, I've coached under 16s and under 14s teams where there are kids there that I'm not going to say they can't play, but might be very lucky to be in the team, and they will find 100 reasons why they should be in the team ahead of that person, or their parents will. Or I've seen it in grade cricket. You got guys who play 2nd or 3rd grade and perform averagely and think they should be in 1st grade, not because they're playing well, but because someone else is playing badly or something like, you know what I mean? So I think it's a little bit of a Gen Y, Gen X sort of thing. They are more
entitled
themselves, or they're confident that some of these kids these days, and it's all about them. And it's, what can you do for me? What can you do for me now? Why aren't I in the team? Why aren't this? You don't get too many of those old school, people who, when they get dropped, say, righto, I deserve to be dropped. I'm just going to put my head down and just ride out the storm here. It's throw the toys out the cot. It's your manager telling you, don't train well, you'll get it, move on. So it's people in their ears as well. I don't think that's alone to West Tigers, but I know what you mean. Like, I mean, Luke Brooks, for instance, he might be a really nice guy, but he's been paid, Joel, on potential for 6 or 7 years. Like he hasn't earned 800,000 a year. I mean, and he's been on that money for 5 or 6 years. So why wouldn't you feel entitled? You're putting in mediocre performances, no finals, big money each year, and whenever he goes on a little 2 or 3 game streak, the media talk him up as an ex-Origin player. So it's sort of a cycle, isn't it? I just think it's I don't think we're alone there.
So what you're saying is basically, let's not have the West Tigers Player of the Year. Just everybody gets a trophy.
Well, you laugh about that, Joel, but it's sort of getting that way these days. I think everyone thinks they deserve something.
I remember Tim Sheen saying, just back to Benji, I remember Tim Sheen saying that the young players at the West Tigers, they make him old, but they keep him young. And I wonder if Benji ever, he's in the locker room and the guys that are about 20, the Asu Kapoas, the world, might be saying, boy, Benji, I was 4 years old when you debuted. Like, there's all these sorts of things when you really start thinking about it. There's just it's bizarre, and I know we're outside, so we don't really have the whole picture. Surely Benji must think, boy, I'm really old. Like this guy was, before I hadn't even gone to school when I debuted.
Yeah, I mean, he's a long time retired, and maybe it's sort of just some players are scared of letting that go, and some players, fall into a big hole in the post years of playing. So don't want to sort of downplay that decision. But it was funny, Joel. I was actually watching an interview with Scott Prince. It was a podcast with Scott Prince, and he was talking about his time at the Tigers. And he did say, and this will depress you more, did say the one regret looking back after his career was he didn't stay longer at the Tigers. I think he promised his wife to go home after 3 years, and he said looking back he wished he played more there because he thought he could have achieved more. But he was talking about 2005, and this is the year we won the competition. And he was talking about, weight sessions and that. And he said, me and Hodjo and Benji, we used to go and sit in the corner and pump the odd weight and sit back and eat cheeseburgers. And it was, it wasn't like it was this great professional side back then. It was a bunch of young blokes having fun with a lot of talent, with a coach who probably knew how to get the best out of them. So, I'm not trying to say that's the way to go now, but I'm sort of saying that Michael Maguire can work this side as hard as he likes. We could have 30 outstanding people in that dressing room, and if we don't have the talent, the results still won't be there.
Yeah. A constant theme that we seem to be saying every week. There is a distinct lack of talent, and I think that is a frustration in itself among the fans. And then to see, as we've mentioned, those levels of entitlement or those egos, that it makes it quite upsetting for fans, because I don't feel like, you go back to 05, there was no expectation. They were all heroes because they just came together. You could tell they loved playing with each other. We're just not feeling that at the moment. It just feels such a convoluted, strange roster. Yeah.
And just on that, because we've spoken a lot about the current problem, but one of the big solutions, we've got to find solutions, because big name players aren't dropping out of the ground. They haven't in the last 10 years at Concord. Look at the team on top of the ladder at the moment, and look how many local juniors are in it in Penrith.
Yeah.
What has happened to West Tigers? We've got a huge catchment area, and if you look at that 05 side that won the premiership, it was all the seeds of the juniors that sprouted in 03 and 04. And we sort of topped that up with the Scott Prince. But what's happened there? Because that's the easiest way back for us. Because the hard, it's a risky move. You bring in big names like, even Joey Leilua is a pretty big name. It can set you back if it doesn't work, because we have to pay overs. Mm. So I think that's something we've got to start to get our heads around. I know this year's been a complete, write-off with the virus, so I don't want to fly off the handle. But surely that's an area we need to do better in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And full credit to Terry Lamb, who isn't most West Tigers fans' favourite person, but to his credit, he was instrumental in putting the West Tigers Cubs together, and that was a huge factor on that performance. So we've done it before. And this is where a message to the club, here is a great way of controlling a narrative. So talk about the work that's being done in the juniors, talk about the pathways, talk about the next generation, and how, and even get get the young guys that are 17 and 18, the ones that look to be, and incorporate them in and do it in the media, like within their media department, show who these guys are, and this is what we're fostering, this is what we're working together, and that unity. Instead, there just seems to be such a focus on the past and on things that are incidental to the nitty gritty of the club, I suppose you'd say. When I look at the West Tigers page, website, there's a whole lot of stuff that isn't really that exciting. It's really not that interesting to, especially, sadly, the rusted fan. It's almost like so much of the media is aimed at the casual observer, rather than keeping the Eddie Ottos and the Joel Helmses and all those crazy guys and girls on the forum and all the people on our Facebook page who are there all the time posting and live and breathe the club. There just seems to be no message to those people. It seems to always just be sort of light and fluffy casual stuff.
Yeah, you might be right. You might be right, Joel. And I think the other thing for me, they were the two things I wrote down for, what we can do in the next 12 months is really sort of create that narrative with the juniors and really try and push that. And I just think we're also missing some leadership on the field. Like this year, Joel, I've sort of looked at us as an easy pushover with the refs. And again, on Saturday night, Ben Cummings, he just didn't give us anything. And he never gives us anything. And I thought, can someone please get in this guy's face and say, Ben, hello, we're on the field, just spray him. I don't even care if you get 10 minutes if we're going to lose the game. At least Robbie Farah, Joel, as divisive as he become, he would get in the referee's face and say, what the hell is going on here? It's 6-1 penalty count. Moses Simbai just, whatever, keeps going on. So I've written down 4 guys, and they've all won premierships. James Tarmow, Josh Adokar, Gareth Widdop, Jared Maria-Hargraves. They're 4 guys. One of them could maybe come in, Joel, and be a captain for a couple of years. I don't know if it's possible, but they're used to winning and they're used to not being pushed over on the field.
Yeah, I'm on the record numerous times saying we need a forward leader. I agree completely. Sometimes I think that the guy that is the leader of the club, i.e. the person who's appointed as the captain, which Moses Mbai is often maybe a reflection. And this is the word incongruence comes to mind, because the A and B is not equaling C. 1 and 1 is not equaling 2. You've got Michael Maguire, who appears to be a hard taskmaster, who is a disciplinarian by all reports, who doesn't take any crap from anyone, right? But then the incongruence, what doesn't make sense is then why you would appoint someone who is the yin to that yang, who is Moses Mbai as the captain. If you look at the great captain Bellamy and Smith, they're like a mirror of each other in a lot of ways. We need someone who's a Michael Maguire man on the field.
Bizarre, isn't it? I mean, I remember he came in and he took 3 or 4 or 5 months to make that decision, because we had 5 captains under clearing, and then he came up with Moses. I mean, it might have come down to the fact he was a player who was on the longest contract, and he was decent age and would grow into it. But we've said it before, it just sort of hasn't worked. And I don't know what the plan is next year, but I just don't think we can keep going down that path. I mean, Benji's gone and Moses is not a captain. Do you say to someone like, Josh Reynolds, Josh, let's get something out of you. Let's leave some sort of legacy at this club. You're on 800,000. We're going to start you at 6 this year. If you want to stay, Benji's gone, captain the side and really lead and show something, leave something at the club. Or do you go someone like a Josh Alloway, who looks like he's got the passion and to do it, a younger guy?
Yeah, I agree. It's just one of those things that doesn't make any sense. What also doesn't make any sense to me, and it's really hard to say this because we're both invested in Michael Maguire. We both believe that he is the man. But he said in that press conference after we'd been beaten by Penrith, he admitted the season was over. The season was over 4 weeks ago. But anyway, he said, he admitted the season is over. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at some of the younger players. And then the team comes out on Tuesday. Benji and Luke Brooks have swapped numbers. Moses Mbai and Adam Dewey have officially now traded positions, which they've been doing in games anyway. Tommy Talau is moved to the extended bench, and AJ Kapoa is on the wing. So that's not adding up either. I don't understand why you wouldn't be trying to. And given the conflict and all that's happened this week, wouldn't you be putting the broom a little bit through it and saying, well, okay, we're going to try a few different things. We're going to mix it up. This is almost exactly the same team as round 1.
Well, he hinted at that, or he more than hinted at that. He said he was going to do that. So that was a surprise. And I thought, well, you've basically just shuffled the deck chairs on what's been happening, swapping the numbers on the halves and swapping Dewey and Moses. But, you know, then on the flip side of that, Joel, I know everyone wants to see new players in the team and young players in the team, but, you know, this is a team that's probably going to lose its last 4 games and confidence is low. So I don't know if you necessarily just say to someone like Jake Simpkins, right, you're starting at 9, Harry Grant, thanks, but no thanks, you know, you're going to go back to Melbourne. I don't necessarily think, you know, that could do some damage long term if you throw guys in before they're ready. They haven't played any football this year. But in saying that, like, I'm surprised someone like Sean Bloor is not on the bench. I'm surprised Tommy Talau is not in the team. I'm surprised, you know, I sort of think it's the right thing to do to keep Benji in the team. But do you say, Benji, go back to the bench and let's go with Josh Reynolds, because you're going to be here next year, Josh. Yeah. So let's start working with Luke Brooks and getting something together.
You're playing against Manly, Eddie, who are not going to make the top 8.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you want to give some of these young guys some game time, NRL game time? This is the best possible time. There is no expectation. You say to them, go out, have fun, do your best. This is all about, it's all about 2021 now. There is no pressure. You know, rather than giving them no game time, and then maybe you might get to round 1 next year where everybody starts afresh. The stakes are right up there. You're playing against full-strength squads that everybody's with a chance of making the 8. And you're going to figure what you're going to throw them in then. I mean, this is the perfect time.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I agree. But you look at the guys. You look at the guys outside the top 17, and this is a problem. There's not much depth in the club, Joel. I mean, I know you're not talking about Robert Jennings. We don't want him back in the team. I know you're not talking about Michael Cheekham, Chris McQueen, even Chris Lawrence. But there's sort of half the guys that are not in there. So it's not like we're denying 5 or 6 gun juniors who are banging down the door to play. You know, even Alex Seyfarth and Oliver Clark, they've been pretty average and that's a tough position in the field in the forwards. But if they're going to be here next year, you would think it would be beneficial to start getting some knocks, even if they're tough knocks. Yeah. You know, even if they're losses, even getting young Jake Simpkins 20 minutes off the bench with Jacob Liddell starting. Yep. You know, if Harry's definitely going back from Melbourne, or getting Josh Reynolds in at 6 and saying, mate, you're staying here next year. Let's show something, please, for the club.
Yeah.
So it was it was an underwhelming team list, but it's been that way for a while.
Yeah. It's all a little bit odd. I've got nothing more to say than it has been an odd week.
It's a chance to win a game, Joel. Maybe he's just thinking short term this week. I just want to try and get a win, because the next 3 weeks are South, Melbourne and Para, and there's no wins coming there. So I think this is the last chance.
Yeah, I know. It's strange logic, but yeah. And I agree completely about Reynolds. If Reynolds is, and even if Reynolds, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, even if Reynolds is still an opportunity to ship him off somewhere else, pick him in first grade and give him the number 6 jersey and say, well, there you go. You know, show what you got. What do you got to lose?
Maybe that's what he's thinking with a couple of them. Yeah. Maybe he's thinking, if I need to try and sell some of these guys, I've got to play them. You know, I can't have them out of this side that's running 12th and going horrible. I've got to actually put them in at fullback, Moses Mbai, Reynolds, Benji. So yeah, I don't know, but it's been a long old last month, and I'm not too confident that we're going to knock out a man either.
No, exactly. All right. Well, it's been a long podcast, Eddie. We better call it quits there. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about again next week. There's a lot more stuff we could have even talked about this week, but time's against us a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Joel. I'll see you next week.
Yeah, Eddie. Bye.